may have to shift from being spontaneous to being more intentional. Most of us in all of our lives, we have appointments, we schedule, we have them on our calendar.
If we're going out to dinner with friends, we don't say, oh, let's just be spontaneous.
I mean, sometimes, but not on a regular diet.
Right.
Sometimes we do.
When we're going to do a podcast with the Smalleys, we don't say, well, we'll just get together sometime.
Let's just show up sometime.
We were bored.
We
We
actually
just
had-
called each other, yeah.
I'm so grateful we're going to jump into this discussion because as a marriage counselor, I sit with couples all the time and they come in with those beliefs that they've been told by well-meaning people, Christians
Yes.
within the church, and they come in and it doesn't work when it's not God's design. And, really looking
That's
at
right.
how do you guys define God's design for sex? And really, how can a couple align their physical intimacy with that design, that divine design?
Yes, and that's been such a rewarding experience for us being called into this field. And the more knowledge we get, the more research, sex in the brain studies that come out, and how it aligns with Scripture. So the facts really affirm God's teaching and word to us, which is what we expect, and yet it's still kind of a nice surprise when it's a reality.
Yeah, let me just jump in there. When we have that question about the differences between men and women, and we go back to that 16th verse of the 3rd chapter of Genesis, when God is kicking Adam and Eve out of the garden,
For having disobeyed him.
he sends Adam out into the fields to deal with the weeds and thistles of life. And unto Eve he said, and your desire shall be for your husband, which really pictures the difference between men and women. Her desire is a relational desire. His is a goal-oriented, task-oriented desire.
And as the husband is able to ride the waves with the woman and get with her where she is, both actually end up being happier. It is to his benefit, even though he gives up his natural tendency to pursuit and to achieve and to reach the goal earlier, and all those ways that our culture trains men.
Right.
I would add another part of that is, if we look at the Song of Solomon, all that Solomon does in that whole book is praise her. He tells her about how he loves the various parts of her body, and he loves her response. And she's the one that does all the inviting. So the model, to get specifically to your question, Erin, what's the biblical model? The biblical model is the husband adores, the woman invites. And when she really feels deeply adored, that opens her heart, and then she invites him, and then they both end up happy.
And unfortunately, what so often happens is because of the teaching that has sometimes been communicated within the Christian community, that the woman's role is to keep the man at home and happy. So it's really her duty. And that duty doesn't bring out the deep joy in the woman. And so then it doesn't really work for the man. So then he gets more desperate. He tries to fix her, which only makes her feel worse about herself. So it's a downward spiral rather than living out this scripture that's so real that when he can just be affirming about anything, anything that he can affirm, rather than try to make her something that will make him feel better.
Yeah.
Well, and then you see, if we add the New Testament part, all the passages that speak to sexuality in the New Testament refer to it as a mutual thing. It's not about the man getting his needs met. It's about them both being equal.
Yeah.
If you think of the verse in Galatians 3:28 where it says, now therefore because of Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, so the racial barriers have been broken down, slave nor free, so the social barriers have been broken down, male nor female. So the gender barriers have been broken down because of Christ. And that's why, if it's going to be fulfilling, if it's going to be godly, it'll be mutual, not dominated by one or the other.
Yeah.
And that concept of mutuality is so key. First, the role of the man versus the role of the woman, and embracing those differences. But then the mutuality, that it's got to be as good for one as it is for the other. We love the Message paraphrase of that 1 Corinthians chapter 7, especially verse 3, where it says, and the marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. And then it goes on to talk about giving ourselves to each other, which is a different feeling than expecting the other person to give themselves. If it's talking to me about giving myself, it's talking to Cliff about giving himself, rather than telling me he needs to give himself.
Right.
Get that difference?
Right.
You know,
Yes.
if it's a demand for me to meet his needs, that's going to create a tension and demand in the sexual relationship. If it's that I can freely enjoy his body and he can freely enjoy mine, that's freeing and delighting and liberating rather than demanding and creating performance anxiety.
That's all kind of a long answer to your question,
I
Erin,
love
but
it.
there you go.
Yes, I love it. I love the thought of mutuality and honoring that within marriage
Yeah.
and the design that Christ gave us.
Yes.
Well, because you guys even talked,
Yes.
you were talking about sort of this mindset of sacrificing, because we imagine that you hear a lot. So whether it's from a guy or from her, either way, but this idea that they're frustrated because
Right.
sex is a need, and I need this, and therefore you must, be available because this is such a need. How, when you hear that, when you hear sex is a need, how do you respond to someone?
We should first try to get them to unpack that for what does that mean to them.
Okay.
Because sure, it is. I mean, we need food, we need,
But
Shelter,
We can
we-
survive
yeah.
without sex, but
Yeah.
you can't survive without
right, right.
without food.
So,
Yeah.
but when
Yes.
when it's based on neediness, it doesn't fulfill. And so what we talk about is, yes, I'm sure you experience it as a need, and we can
Yeah.
really understand that.
Strong desire,
But how are you how are you likely to actually experience fulfillment and not feel that neediness? And it's by letting go of that neediness and getting to with each other and learning to really enjoy your togetherness.
That's good.
And freeing each other in that experience rather than demanding and performing.
It's good.
It is so good. What about, so often couples will come in and one will have a higher sex drive, one will have a lower sex drive. How do you encourage couples to navigate that? Because I know that often it used to be, stereotypical. It was the male that had the higher sex drive, and that's not the case anymore.
No, it isn't. In fact, there's a book out that you may have seen called I Want Him to Want Me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's the woman's version of the neediness. And you almost don't have to read it because the title kind of says it, but there is, right. We did used to talk about that being more dominant from the man, and probably still there's a higher
Yeah.
expression of that from males than females. But many females feel like all we ever talk about is when the man has more desire. What if I have more desire and he isn't interested? Interesting observation we've had over the years is when the man lacks desire, the couple doesn't have very much sex. When the woman lacks desire, they may have regular, frequent sex.
Interesting.
And that is a difference that,
Because what's going on there is she's doing her duty, and
Right.
and he's going after getting his needs met. So when we talk about how do we handle that neediness, we try to differentiate between whether that's an actual physiological, if it's the man, I need to be free to get aroused and have an ejaculation so that I'm fulfilled. Otherwise, I get
In a
depressed
bad
or
mood.
I get in a bad mood.
Yeah.
I'm not sure Scripture ever taught about sex to be a mood reliever, but that is
It's so true.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
But so we try to define when you talk about this as a need, is it a need for physical release? Is it a need for affirmation? That is, when I can have sex with her, then I feel better about myself, which is feeding my own need and insecurity rather than a relational thing that's between us.
Yeah. And then
And,
that's
so-
operating
but
outside
when
of
there
God's
are differences,
design. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Makes
it
a lot of
is.
sense.
when there are differences, there are differences between men and women and between us as individuals, whether that's with desire and one of us having a higher desire than the other. If we can work with those differences and embrace those rather than trying to fix each other and make a change, like
But let me give an example. Very often when couples come and that's the issue that they're presenting, we'll talk with them separately, and we find out from the man if he had his desire, would have sex twice a week, let's say. And when we say, well, what do you think she wants? Oh,
Never.
hardly ever, maybe once a month, kind of thing. Then we talk with the wife, and we
This is
ask
very
her
interesting.
what she wants, and she'll say, oh, once or twice a week would be okay, be good. And what do you think he wants? Oh, he wants it every day.
maybe more than once a day. And what we find is, particularly when the man has a higher desire than the woman, that he is pursuing based on they've gotten this feeling that she doesn't want it quite as much as he does.
So he's just looking for any window of opportunity. So he's checking the odds.
So how about now?
Every 12 minutes would this be a good time? When in fact he doesn't want it 10 times a day. He's just checking if this would be a good time.
But one thing we do start with is that question for both of them, to have it fill it out separately. And it'd be an interesting thing for you to do in your counseling, even if you're not specifically a sexual therapist. How often do you have sex? How often would you want to have sex? And how often do you think your spouse would want to have sex? And often those numbers decrease the tension between the two of them because they realize they're not that far apart. They've just gotten into some bad patterns of initiation and avoidance because of that slight difference that's there.
Well, and
Yeah.
particularly if it's a male dominant thing, where the guy is always pursuing, and so
And that's probably why, if the woman has lower drive than the man, they still are having frequent sex. Whereas when the man has lower drive than a woman, the woman isn't typically pursuing, and so they don't have sex as often.
That's
So,
that's
but
so
desire-
fascinating. Yeah.
we would say that about 40% of the time that people come with a sexual issue, it centers around differences in desire as they perceive it.
And that's one reason we encourage them to read something out loud together, like our books, Enjoy and The Married Guy's Guide, and talk about it. And the reading out loud is so important because of how our brain works. And when we verbalize, we have to shift from our right hemisphere to our left hemisphere. And the right hemisphere, our emotions have more control over our body. And when we verbalize, that diffuses that control over our body and makes it more in our control.
So that's why we would suggest for couples who are struggling with this kind of thing to read a book out loud together and deal with it, not like an assignment to get done. If they read one page and it triggers a conversation.
Or one
great.
paragraph or one
Yeah.
sentence, and that opens up the conversation. It isn't about getting through it. It's about having a tool to verbalize and talk with each other and be able to make changes and work them out together rather than have it be an ongoing conflict and tension that they're fighting about constantly.
Yeah, I love that explanation because often I will suggest that to couples, and I'm always like, I'm not quite sure why, but now I know the brain physiology behind it. I love that.
That's really
Right,
good.
right.
I mean, you guys
Yeah.
have been doing this for so long, and you've had such a powerful ministry.
50 years.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
amazing.
it's incredible. So I was trying to picture myself, like if Erin and I were a premarital couple, and we've come to you, so we haven't even began our marriage, our sexual relationship. What would be those one or two things that you would absolutely want us to understand as we come into marriage about our sexual relationship?
Well, what we really help couples try to do is transfer their premarital passion into marriage. So, to whatever degree they are connecting physically, there is that premarital passion and intense desire. And how do we keep that alive in marriage as we transfer into marriage? And one of the things is to realize that, again, this goes back to brain chemistry and so much that we've learned, that newness, sexual newness, is very exciting. That's what is such the hook in pornography,
Yeah.
because it can be new and different every time. But to last a lifetime, which God calls us to, it has to build into intimacy, which is much more of a quiet love. So there's a physiologist at UCLA that talks, Dr. Alan Shore, who talks about the dopamine-driven sex is excited love, and that's the newness, the premarital. We're so eager and looking forward to. And then we have to make the transition into intimacy, that true becoming one deeply, that can last 61 years, and we hope more, but it's a quieter, it's a more quiet love. It doesn't have that hook to it, but it's still deeply satisfying and deeply important in our lives.
So that's one of the things we talk about. Another one is to have a conversation about their expectations. A lot of couples get into trouble early on, and the difference is that he was thinking when they went on their honeymoon they were going to have sex 3 times a day, and that's pretty much all they were going to do. And she thought they'd have a sexual experience, but she also wanted to go to the beach or climb the mountain or whatever.
Or it could be the opposite, that she's all excited and gets to the hotel room and he turns on the TV because he's insecure, unsure, doesn't know what to do, and she's devastated. She feels like she's not attractive to him. So
Clear expectations is a
talking
second
about
thing
it
we would
ahead of
talk
time.
about. A third thing we would say is if they happen to notice that there is a shift in desire shortly after marriage, where before
or
marriage,
even as they anticipate marriage, right? Sometimes.
that if there's a shift in that, and particularly for the woman, if her interest and desire decreases radically from where it once was, that's often a sign that there's some undealt with stuff, particularly abuse in her past. When there has been sexual abuse in the past, we often find a very quick drop off once the marriage starts. And so that becomes kind of a little warning signal. Okay, there's some stuff here that needs to get dealt with.
And so one of the other things for keeping sex alive in marriage and making that transition is making sure that past hurts or sexual dysfunctions are dealt with either through self-help, working through one of our books or someone else's books, or through seeking professional counseling. And because there's no way we can be totally deeply fulfilled if there's stuff we bring, and then we have to work that through.
Let's talk about one from the men's side. If the man has been a frequent visitor to porn, even if he's maybe not addicted, but been there regularly, the belief usually is, once we get married, then I won't need to look at this stuff anymore.
Right.
But so often that may be true for the first few months, but then one day she's not there, or she's in a bad mood, or she's not feeling well, or she's having her period or whatever, and then that old urge calls. So just like abuse has to be dealt with when it was there in the past, if there's been a hook to pornography, that needs to be dealt with. That's not going to go away automatically just because somebody gets married. And that needs to be faced and dealt with.
So that's kind of the advice for the premarital couple. What advice would you give
Yes.
the couple that's been married 30, 40, 50 years and they begin to experience some new challenges? What do you say to them?
Yes, and what we would say is you may have to shift from being spontaneous to being more intentional. And we would say, besides mutuality, making our differences work for us, and dealing with past hurts or issues, that being intentional. Most of us in all of our lives, we have appointments, we schedule, we have them on our calendar.
If we're going out to dinner with friends, we don't say, oh, let's just be spontaneous.
I mean, sometimes, but not on a
Yeah,
regular diet.
Right.
Sometimes we do.
You know, when we're going to do a podcast with the Smalleys, we don't say, well, we'll just get together
Let's
sometime.
just show up sometime.
We were bored.
We
We
actually
just
had-
called each other. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
The first thing is that recognizing that, like in every other part of life, it's important that you plan for sexual experiences. And some couples like to say, you know, Thursday night will be our night, or every other Saturday morning, or you name it. It doesn't matter when or how often.
and the couple usually says, but what if we're not turned on? And we say you're leaving room to becoming turned on if that should happen. But it's just taking that time for each other to talk and caress and kiss and love and enjoy each other's bodies and making it as good as it can be given your situation.
And that's another thing we'd like to talk about for couples that have been married for a long time, and that is life changes. You know, when you first get married, before there are children, that's one
There's a
segment.
lot of freedom there.
Then kids come along, and their statistics shows that when the first child comes, the sexual frequency drops by 50%.
Oh, wow.
That because
Not for every couple,
but
again.
just on average, because all of a sudden now she's tired, she's nursing, she still has some pain from the birth.
For whatever the reasons, you're on 24/7 for caring for another person as a couple. And in our day today, the husband probably takes more role in that than it was true, typical of our era. But so it can be both of them.
That's one of the changes. Then it gets okay for a while, but then you have adolescents who are staying up.
Later than you are.
Right.
We know that.
Yeah.
And then it's back to the same
And so
problem.
now you're worried about them, or if they're out and they didn't come home, or who knows what the concerns are.
But then the last one leaves for college or work or whatever, and finally you're looking at each other and saying, now who are we? You know, how did we
Yeah.
get back to where we were one day 20 years before this all started?
But then life comes along. Somebody gets breast cancer, or somebody has a hip replacement, or somebody gets Parkinson's, or
Your bodies change,
or
your
get
hormone
Right.
levels
prostate
change.
problems. Who knows? So the thing we talk about there is making it the best it can be given your current life circumstances, not trying to make it what it was when you got married, because that's
Or
just
seeing
not
it
real.
as a failure if everything doesn't work the way it worked when you were younger. And being in our 80s, we're very aware of that, both for ourselves
Just
and
so
our
you know,
couples.
we're both 83. So
Well, I'm
Wow.
83 on when Cliff gets 83 on September 1st, he starts saying we're both 83, but I'm actually going to be 83 this Saturday,
Oh, happy
December
birthday.
14th. I'm going to be
So-
83.
Happy birthday.
Wow.
You guys look amazing.
do. I
You
would-
look amazing.
I would never have guessed
me,
that.
me either.
Well, and I like the thinking there, because we always love to ask, because you guys been married 61, almost 61 years, right?
61.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
61 years.
if you could go back 61 years to that moment that you guys were taking your vows, making that covenant between the Lord and you guys, what advice would you give that younger Joyce? What advice would you give that younger Cliff about marriage?
We were so blessed that I graduated from a school of nursing 3 weeks before we married. And in that school of nursing, it was at a Baptist school of nursing, there was a Christian woman's clinical psychologist, and she taught us a prep to marriage class. And she taught us 1963, a very healthy view of sexuality. And I took notes and shared it with Cliff. He was across town at a university.
I was at Bethel University.
And so
at the
we
time.
feel like that preparation, that's why we wrote our book, Getting Your Sex Life Off to a Great Start. That preparation saved us so much. So much. I mean,
Well, then let me jump in there. We'll give that book to people.
Yes.
Because it's designed to be read 6 months before you get married.
Gotcha.
And they'll say, oh, we don't want to read this.
we don't want to ruin anything. Oh, we want to say, please read
Read
it.
it.
Read it. Read it.
Because-
If you then they say, what if we get so turned on? Go on a park bench in the public or in your parents' living room when they're walking around. You know. But read it. Read it.
Go lay in your parents'
So-
bed and read it together. That'll
Yeah, there
that'll
you-
solve everything.
Go to Walmart.
There you go to Walmart. There you go.
Walk the aisles and read together.
Yes, but we just, anyway, so our pastor had said to be sure to start your marriage off with scripture. So I brought a flashlight along and read scripture to Cliff on the way to the motel, lest we waste any time.
So, I can tell you that I actually remember more about the second part of the evening than
Then
the scripture
she
reading.
read.
That's fair. That's God's fault. That was His
but-
design.
I know,
exactly.
I know.
So we.
But the whole idea of preparing
Yeah.
well
Yes.
is, and not avoiding the subject is what is really going to help people get off to a good start.
And if you've
good.
been raised with the purity culture, particularly, where sex may seem like it's a very nasty, awful thing, you may need to, we get a lot of women calling that are newly married or anticipating marriage and just cannot embrace that sex should be good and feel good. And they're going to have to do some work on that.
So- What we try to have people have at least a core belief as they're going into marriage are 5 things. 1, sex is good and of God. Secondly, sexual curiosity and interest is natural. Thirdly,
Sexual responses.
our responses are innate. We are born sexually responsive beings.
Those responses are going to happen. They're not sin. They're not wrong. If a man gets aroused, if a woman gets aroused.
But fourthly, we are responsible for what we do with those responses.
And we can be responsible. Being aroused isn't an excuse for action. It's a natural thing, and to be enjoyed, to enjoy those feelings, thank God for those feelings. And
But we still are responsible to make decisions about what we do with those responsibilities. That's true our whole life.
yes, and that making decisions for sex and marriage and making sure we really take time for that. And that's back to that intentionality, that we block out time in our lives, particularly during those difficult times.
And then the 5th point is that the scriptures are the standard by which we determine
What
all our
are-
interactions with people, including our spouse.
That mutuality and biblical teaching is the guide for making those decisions.
I love it. And you guys have such a beautiful way of weaving scripture in.
You do.
Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we can tell you guys really live that out, and that is that cornerstone for you guys. So thank you so much for your ministry. Thank you for what you've done all these years
Yes.
to help couples really strengthen that sexual relationship and their relationship in their marriage. So
Yes, and thank you
guys.
for your 61-year marriage. I'm sure it just
Thank
speaks
you.
to so
Yes.
many.
We
Yeah.
are blessed. We
Very,
feel
very
very,
blessed.
very grateful.
One of the things that we often hear when we do seminars for married couples and stuff is We got some good information that you shared with us, but we learned the most by the natural
Yeah.
interaction.
Yes.
Agreed.
Our
between
modeling.
Yes.
That this
so
is
good.
this is a model of intercourse, if you will. It's not a male dominant system or female dominant system. It's about mutuality.
And it isn't that we always agree on everything or that we're always the same on everything, but we learning to work with those differences and affirm each other and take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, I did want to reassure you, we once did have a disagreement.
But Joyce
Oh,
won.
yeah,
So,
I've missed that. Yeah.
Until I said yes, dear.
Well, again,
thank
you
you
guys,
guys so much.
so much for being with us.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes.
you for having us. It's
You're
been a
welcome.
Love it.
delight. Thank you.
Thanks.